Good morning, everyone. This is the special meeting for the West Ada School Board. Appreciate everyone coming this morning and taking their time out. We have a very important meeting this morning, which is a work session, and we'll be discussing, of course, the impact of the levy. To start, as usually is our custom, we will be taking a minute of silence, or excuse me, taking our phones off. The sound off so we can read the Pledge of Allegiance and start the meeting. At this time, please mute your phones and start the Pledge of Allegiance. Excellent. Thank you very much. And so beginning our regular session, or our session, I believe Dr. Reynolds will be beginning. This is a work session format, so we'll be open to discussion. There is no real, we're not adhering to formal Robert's rules. But we will be having the school district talk first and let them have the floor before we go in with questions. Dr. Reynolds.
Good morning, Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees. Thank you so much for coming together this morning. The time frame for our meeting is 7:30 to 8:30. That doesn't mean that all discussions will be finished about the supplemental levy and our budget moving forward, but we have interviews set up this morning for 2 other schools. So I appreciate your early morning attendance. The purpose of this meeting is just to make sure that we are headed in the right direction in terms of what next steps we need to take as a district regarding the failure of the supplemental levy. We don't have all the details put together yet because we just wanted to touch base with our board and make sure that you feel comfortable with and support the overall direction and the steps that we need to take. So Mr. Gillen has a brief overview for you to look at, and then based on the discussion, we'll know better how to move forward. And some of the big questions: should we run the levy again in August or not? Should we, as Jonathan prepares the budget for next year, one option is dipping into our reserve funds to some extent. And should we tighten our belts, and to what extent do we need to tighten our belts, and what are some of the possibilities there, so that when Jonathan presents the 2021 budget to you for your approval, that you'll all feel comfortable with where we are and where we're headed. So Jonathan, if you'd like to take over.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. Chairman and trustees, I am going to share my screen, and we can start walking through what are some of the options that we have. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen okay?
No, we don't have you sharing yet, sir.
Okay, that was what. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, can you see me?
1 second.
We see your screen, just not the slide deck.
Well, isn't that interesting? Here we go. It was working great when we tested it.
Of course it was.
It's probably your focus. You might be on your other monitor.
Where's your shared window?
I see it.
There we go. Sorry, wrong button.
There it is.
Technical error. There was 4 screen options and I picked the one to the left. I should have picked the one to the right. So good morning. What I plan to do is start to walk through some of the recommendations that we discussed yesterday as part of our executive team meeting. So what we're going to have is a slide essentially for each of the options. I'm going to walk through a little bit of the impact of those options, and then I'll talk about the savings. And then at the end, I have a little Excel spreadsheet where I can walk through some other calculations we've done. So one of the first
Mr.
reduction
Chairman,
options.
I'm not seeing. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it's not on my screen at all. So I don't know.
Yeah, I do see it. Trustee Johnson, is there a setting you might have?
I can see Jonathan's face. I don't know if we can just email it out and I can pull it up from an email.
Oh, if you might, you might have it on, you're looking at all the attendees instead of the screen, if there's a way to minimize that. I'm not sure.
I took that off. Yeah, I don't see it at all.
I can.
Trustee Johnson, I wasn't in the live view for some reason. Down in the bottom left corner. I don't know if you can see live, but I had to click live and then it jumped me to where we're at now. Do you have that?
Okay. Okay. Yep. Once I close the live view, it's good. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, well, I will continue. So again, each one of the reduction options, essentially as a slide, I'll walk through the impact of that option and I'll also talk about the savings that it would generate. So as you can see with reduction item number 1, we were looking at a reduction of staff contract days by 2 days. And so we'd be looking at adjustments to staff calendars. You see specifically some groups we've identified: custodial staff, classified administrators, and teachers would essentially get a 2-day reduction. We're hoping to do these, or one of the ideas associated with these staff contract days is looking at either a holiday or a non-student contact day. So it wouldn't necessarily reduce instructional hours, at least as part of our conversation right now, but would reduce salaries and generate anticipated savings from that. The dollar amount we anticipate that would generate is roughly $1.76 million. Item number 2, we've been talking a lot about the stimulus funding associated with the CARES Act. When we first went through and set the general fund budget that we discussed last week, as we walked through, we talked about $1.9 million being transferred into the general fund. We're anticipating receiving right at $3.06 million, and so we would have another 1.1 that we could allocate towards to offset the reduction in the levy. So essentially, this option is just utilizing fully the stimulus dollars that we're going to receive. We anticipate we've now received an application from the state as far as being able to apply for that. So that'll be the task and project both this weekend and next week, is to get an application in so that we'll start having access to the funding next fiscal year. Reduction item number 3 is a reduction in staffing. So it would be 30 staff across the district, 15 classified and 15 certificated. The plan with this is not to do reductions of folks who are currently here, but instead look through attrition and retirement. So as people leave the district, we wouldn't be filling those positions. As we have attrition in staff, we would essentially capture the savings associated with that. The number was calculated based on an average salary rate for those groups. So obviously there'll be differences between and across that as the reductions actually implemented. But our projection of that is that we'll be able to save through the reductions roughly $1.57 million in that next budget year. Reduction item number 4 includes an increase in the pay to participate fee. So the fee currently is set at $110 for high school and $90 for middle school. That would jump by $20 for each one. So it would be $130 for high school, $110 for middle school. This will generate an additional $150,000 in revenues that we can use to offset expenditures. As part of this process, because it is a 5% increase, above a 5% increase in the current fee amount, there is a fee hearing that we would have to have. And so just making you aware of that and gave you a copy of the Idaho statute so that you can take a look at it. That process will happen as part of the budget process. So we would have a hearing not only for our budget, but as part of the budget approval process, we would have a fee increase hearing as well. Item number 5, we do have a fair amount of what we call extended day contracts. So everybody has a working calendar, and then if we purchase additional days beyond that working calendar, those are additional days for tasks we need completed or objectives we like to meet. And so those are called extended day contracts. Our goal would be to, as part of the reduction already in days, look at reducing or eliminating extended day contracts. And so that would be, we're projecting a savings of roughly $450,000. Areas that will be affected would be counseling. Our academic coaches have additional days, and then also we have some interns that also have extended day contracts. Item number 6, we'll be we're proposing increasing the employee contribution of insurance from $30 to $35. This is part of our single only contribution that staff pay on a monthly basis. And so that cost increase that individuals will be paying will result in a $171,000 reduction in district insurance expenses. So because of the additional out-of-pocket or additional premium payments for the employee, the district's employer portion will be able to be offset. And so we'll notice $171,000 in district and savings across the general fund. Item number 7. So last week during the budget presentation, we talked a little bit about the course cost allocation and that we allocate dollars out of our general fund to schools, specifically secondary schools in this case for this allocation, to help with offsetting costs associated with the academics and what we used to collect a long time ago with the course fees. And so as part of this allocation in the 1920 fiscal year, we allocated $852,000. As part of the first set of impacts associated with the 5% reduction, we had cut that number in half. And so the goal was to reduce it down to $426,000. Now with the loss of the supplemental levy, if you also remember from last week, that was kind of on the list of things that we would reduce. We reduced it a little further. During the presentation last week, we talked about eliminating it entirely. With this reduction, what we're going to look at is still try to leave $150,000 in the allocation itself. And so that will generate still projected savings for us of $277,000. And then I have some information going from the 852 down to the 426 and then eventually down to the 149. So it's a multi-step reduction based on what the impact of what was that caused it. The first half came from the 5% reduction, and then the other $277,000 is being generated or as a reduction associated with the supplemental levy. Our Medicaid transferring, so we do have a Medicaid fund that does have some fund balance. It's a separate fund, but associated and reported with general fund operations, and so that has some fund balance in there. And essentially what we're going to do is utilize some of that fund balance as a transfer into the general fund to help offset those expenses. And so it will be roughly a 25% reduction in the fund balance in that fund as from where I think it's going to end this year. So the fund is already going to be taking a reduction this year associated with the fact that we just didn't generate as much in Medicaid billings during the closure process as you would anticipate. And so this would be a further reduction in the fund balance. I do still believe the fund will be fine. It will still have some savings available to it should the need arise. Other things we also have to think about with this fund, which is why we want to ensure we do still keep some fund balance in it as part of our requirements for special education. We need to meet what's called maintenance of effort requirements. And so part of that is spending at least one more dollar than we did the previous academic year. For many federal programs, they've already received a waiver associated maintenance of effort requirements because many districts were closed across the nation. Unfortunately, we haven't received such a waiver yet for IDEA funding. And so we could run into the situation where we'll actually have to incur some general fund costs associated with IDEA programs that normally would have been federally reimbursed. Just because of the fact that we need to make sure we meet a maintenance of effort requirement associated with our local funding or district funding outside of the states, outside of the federal funds. So I'm just continuing to monitor that. I've visited with the State Department of Ed on their expectations of whether we'll get a waiver and then whether their costs we can still identify that will qualify for maintenance effort. But there is the potential of another possible $500,000 impact. And so we'd like to be able to keep some dollars in the Medicaid fund to be able to manage that impact should it happen. And then reduction item number 9. So this would be a utilization of our fund balance. And so on a Excel spreadsheet I'm going to show you in a moment, I'm going to try to walk through what is a 3-year fund balance projection, my expectation or the knowledge we have today of where it is we think we're going to be at. And then we are anticipating, said before, right, that we are going to generate some savings associated with the closure. And so a lot of this reduction, you're seeing a number there of 8 million. A substantial chunk of that is generated from the fact that we had some savings associated with the closure this year, and I've tried to do our best to identify what those savings look like and how the impact is going to be and what it is we think that's going to look like as we work through the audit process. And so ideally it'll be utilizing those one-time savings associated with the COVID-related closure to help offset the reduction here in the supplemental levy. I'm going to switch to an Excel spreadsheet real quick. And are you all able to see the Excel spreadsheet that I have posted up here?
No.
I cannot,
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Yeah, that was what I was a little worried about. There we go. You should be able to see it now.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So what I tried to do here is walk through what would a 3-year fund balance projection look like. And then I did it in a couple of different options so that we can kind of take a look at what that 8.04 million reduction would be, what the impact would be, and how do we see things looking over the next couple of years if we were to use that fund balance. So as of right now, like I said, we have some dollar amounts and we have some savings I anticipate. We also have some overages and revenues. So what I've done on the top here, we're going to focus, we're just going to start with this first column over here, the base case, which pretty much aligns with the PowerPoint presentation that we just walked through. And we're just going to walk through the impacts and where we see some savings and where we see some increases. So we already have some anticipated additional revenues beyond our budget. And so we have earnings on investments. When I presented the budget last year, I said that we try to keep investment earnings pretty conservative. This year, up until the last few months, has been a good investment year. I'm not anticipating that to continue so much in next year. I think we'll be more in line with budget. But we did have the pool had really good rates and we were able to maximize our returns there. So that's going to help with increasing fund balance. We did have some state revenues that were budget. Remember, we budgeted for 500 students. We ended with 750. So a lot of that we spend as part of the process. But specifically on the revenue side, because we budgeted at 500 and hit a number of 750, we do have some increases in revenues. We have some increases associated with state portion of broadband funding. We get a little bit of a refund associated with the internet services we provide as part of both E-rate and the state's portion of E-rate. And so we have dollars associated with that. And then rental income was just a little higher than we anticipated. And so all of those things will help contribute to what our revenue streams are going to look like. And then what I've done is I've tried to go through and say, this is what we think we're going to save, this 5.25 million in expenses. And you probably heard me say, right, calculating a fund balance projection, even all the way through the process is a little more difficult for us to do in June under a normal circumstances year. Under this year, it's even a little more complicated, right? But we've been discussing with folks across the district about ensuring that we save every dollar we can. And then associated with just certain things with closures that you would anticipate we'll have savings on. Utilities were less, we weren't paying substitutes. So ideally we're gonna have some savings. So we've run what we feel like is a conservative projection of where we think those savings will be and how that's gonna contribute to the fund balance. So essentially what we run through is a potential fund balance projection of up to 34 million that we have going into June 30. And then what I start looking at is, okay, what would happen if we use the 8.049 of fund balance next fiscal year? So the way the fund balance is going to work is it's going to roll at June 30 into our reserve account. And then we're going to have to budget the usage July 1, which is where we start talking about how we have a deficit fund balance as we utilize the projected fund balance and start spending it down. And so this would be the 8.049 we talked about with the fund balance usage that was on that PowerPoint slide associated with the reduction in the supplemental levy. And so with that reduction, we could be at a position where we have roughly $26 million in fund balance as of the end of next fiscal year. And I caution you, just this is a projection, right? So there will be expenses that will probably come up, but I think this is I would just say we're very good about trying to do our best to manage that risk, but we may not hit 26. It may be more like 25 or 24, right? So just a little bit of risk associated with that. Then the following, we walk through what next year's impacts will be, right? We start talking about how that at some point again, now we're talking about 21-22 fiscal year. So now we're starting to get a little further out, but we know some transactions are probably going to happen. We know around that time, the IFA sale we're presuming will occur. There'll also be the associated usage of the IFA fund, the IFA revenues that we've generated from that, and again, the timing difference that we kind of talked about. And so both of those transactions you'll see here. And then there is a fund balance usage potential associated with opening a Waihe High School. And so it was probably in early February, we talked about our 10-year kind of like capital plan, and we talked about what enrollment was going to look like and what's the potential of opening new school buildings and what the impact on our fund balance. And if you remember during that conversation, I talked about the impact of Waihe was really going to be spread probably across 2 years. And a lot of that was because we were anticipating a reduction in enrollment. So our normal 500 that we had built that plan on was going to drop to 350 because we were having a charter school open in that area. And so we anticipated a little bit less enrollment. And so this is the dollar amount that was essentially captured on that capital plan. It is a little higher than, well, it's substantially higher than what we had originally anticipated. And that's because some of the revenues that we were going to use to offset that fund balance reduction, we're essentially using this year. When we built that plan, we weren't anticipating a 5% holdback coming forward, and then obviously the loss of the supplemental levy. So we are going to be utilizing a little more fund balance in a more worst case scenario associated with opening the Waihe. So then we come down to roughly $24 million. And then you're just going to see another 735. That's the last portion. If you also remember from that presentation, we were going to spread it across a couple of years. And so that's the potential last portion of fund balance impact. And so that aligns, that option is a base case option associated with what you've seen in the PowerPoint and just the things that we're already kind of planning for in the future. Then I went to assumption number 1 and started to say, well, what could fund balance look like if a couple of those other things that we weren't anticipating were to happen? And so as you can see, the revenues haven't changed at all. You know, we're anticipating those, but maybe the maintenance of effort, that item that I discussed with you, we're not able to get a waiver for that. And so what is the impact of that? It's between $500,000 and $750,000 associated with the general fund. So let's say now our savings goes down some. And so what does that do? Well, you know, you have an impact on the fund balance. And then as you can see, we walked down and then we started saying, okay, what if next year, now Devin has done a masterful job and he does great work at managing the budget. But let's say as we start to roll out to one-to-one, not every dollar amount we identified as savings we're going to be able to do. And so in some ways, we're going to have some additional costs. So what we tried to capture here was, well, let's say that the loss in the IT technology funding, we lost 1.1 million. We're going to have to recapture half of our fund's going to have to pick that up. Okay, so that's an additional expense hitting the fund balance. You know, kind of these, we start walking through what are the options that could negatively impact the fund balance further. And then you see down below the same number to the left, the impact on the supplemental levy loss and on fund balance. So now we come down to a new number, as you can see, slightly different from what we had in the first column. Then we're going to walk through the same kind of transactions, the IFA sale and the fund balance associated with it, and then again the fund balance impact associated with Waihe. So then for option number 3, I kind of wanted to walk through what would it look like if our fund, if other bad things continue to happen. You know, so we had a negative impact associated with supplemental levy, and then what if enrollment drops? You know, all of those other fears or things that we start talking about. Can we still weather this with the fund balance usage that we're recommending in the PowerPoint? And so here you can see we have the same kind of revenue numbers, but now things are going to start changing. We said, well, what if it's not only the MOE impact, but maybe some projections, and there's some dollar amounts we didn't think about that we needed to incur before year end that we hadn't planned on, right? And so that savings number drops a little further. Okay, and so now what does our fund balance impact look like? And as you can see, in each of these scenarios, the fund balance carryover as of June 30 continues to drop. Then what would happen if we lost another 3% of our enrollment? So the state has essentially it's an insurance cap. It's a stop loss provision. After districts lose 3% of their enrollment and their associated support unit calculations, then there are dollars associated with kind of helping the district maintain nothing nothing more than a 3% reduction. I don't know that that insurance policy or that stop loss has ever been implemented with the idea in mind that our district would be one of those ones that would use it. But I started to walk through, what does that look like? What does it look like if we lose 3% support units? And what does that mean in our calculation of our fund balance? And so that's another $6.2 million that we could have potentially impact. And then you start to see, just like from the items before, we have the $500,000 associated with an IT loss. And then we have that standard fund balance usage. And this is where we start to see some different numbers, right? We start to say, oh, if we have an enrollment impact, now our fund balance dropped much faster. And then you can see we have the same IFA transaction. And then what I tried to walk through is, okay, what happens if the supplemental levy doesn't pass again? So what does that start to look like? And obviously, I just pulled another $8 million. So the same number you've seen above, and said that would be another fund balance impact. And then let's talk about what happens if we don't receive this financial situation continues. We have another associated holdback. And what does it look like associated with the one-time monies that we have using in our budget to help us manage the holdback and the supplemental levy this year? And there's no more stimulus funding, right? And so now we have another impact associated with that. And so really what I wanted to try to do was be able to walk through what stress testing the fund balance looks like. And you can see, as you would anticipate with a stress test, right, it really starts to fall, right? Now, obviously, there are a lot of sub items in this column G that we would probably try to mitigate well before then. And so what we would try to look at is, if the supplemental levy didn't pass again, we would be making different kinds of cuts. We'd be looking to try to see what we can do to manage fund balance. If we start to look at, okay, we don't have those one-time dollars because of stimulus funds, what other adjustments are we going to make? And so this was more just a future look of what is the worst case scenario and where do we need to start thinking if we choose this option. And if we go with using the fund balance, here's where we need to start thinking and keep an eye on as things continue to happen, as adjustments happen. Here's where points where we need to start making different and more harder decisions. It's not meant to walk through and say we shouldn't be utilizing the fund balance, because I think there are a lot of situations here that we would try to manage through and adjust well before then, but it more gives us kind of a track record, both as a board and as an administration, of where are touch points where when different decisions happen, we need to start be thinking about, we need to make different, deeper cuts and look at different ways that we're going to try to manage our budget.
Jonathan, I got a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the enrollment insurance, if this enrollment is more than 3%, that there's state insurance, but you said that it's never been tried with a district as large as ours. Do you think that might be a problem? I mean, are you foreseeing a problem there?
Chairman and trustees, thank you for the question. It could be. So I've talked with the state, we've had relatively just casual conversations about it, right? Because we're not seeing that as of right now. We're planning for just no enrollment growth. And so I don't know that West Ada has never utilized that right now. Every year what we do is we just contribute to the fund, right? But I can tell you we contribute on average around 3 support units to the fund. A 3% drop, which they wouldn't pay for that first 3%, we bear that burden on our own. For us is 58 support units. And so then anything after that, I think it would probably be something that we'll have to try to figure out how it looks, right? What I know that it exists. I don't know that we're all certain if we used it, how much does the state have available and would it work? I think that'll be just kind of a question we'll work through only in the event that happens. And let's hope that we don't have to live through that experience in that event of a loss in enrollment as well.
Thank you.
So with that, kind of finished walking through the options, and I'd love to take any questions that you have.
If there's no one else, with questions. I do have another one. I was curious, what does the reduction in staff look like? You said you have 15 classified, 15 certified with attrition. I mean, we're looking at, is there an idea of what the impact might be?
Chairman and trustees, I don't know that we've actually gone that far yet, right? So I think step one was really looking at what are the dollar amounts associated with making that decision. And then as we move forward, I think we'll be trying to now evaluate what is the impact of those and what are the staff that qualify, right? So we had a great conversation yesterday about there may be certain positions that come up that we say that is a critical position. And so that might be one that contributes to the 15. And there might be other positions where we say, okay, that one is going to contribute. So we haven't necessarily gone through and identified specifically, here's the touch points where we're going to impact those. We all know that we run pretty lean here at the district and across the district, right? And so we're going to do whatever we can to ensure that we have as least a negative impact on operations as we can, and we'll make those decisions in a way that will be best for our overall operations. But have we focused on exactly what positions yet? No, we have not.
Okay, thank you, then.
Mr. Chairman, this
Please.
is Steve.
Trustee.
This, I don't know if it's necessarily for Jonathan, perhaps Mary Ann or Joe could help. I got an email last night from an old friend of mine who said that he was a head custodian in a building over in the Boise district, and he has many friends who are custodians in the West Ada district. And apparently there is a rumor floating around that custodial positions are on the chopping block. And I want to make sure that I can give him information that says, no, if any cuts in employee budget take place, it'll be due to attrition. Nobody is going to get cut. May I say that with any assurance, or is that still up in the air?
Trustee or Chairman Klopfenstein?
David, please.
And Trustee Smiley, I want to address a couple things. One, I just want to let you guys know what we have done as far as staffing as soon as we knew the levy is passed. I sent out an email Wednesday morning advising to freeze all hiring and any hiring that happened. I need to know about it before we make that decision in anticipation of a potential reduction of FTE and potentially some forced transfers with people within the district, and any openings that we had from attrition. We want to make sure that we can fill with those forced transfers before we hire people from the outside as best possible. We do think I've also sent an email to all of my secondary principals, looking at their schedules, making sure that we are being as efficient and effective as possible in every single area to save some FTE where we can throughout the district. I've also, in all of my elementary schools, I've been through class sizes or projected class sizes with every single principal, class by class, where we do have, and we've had this trend for 3 or 4 years now, where projected enrollment is actually going down in the elementary level, but it's increasing in the secondary level, especially in the high school level. And that's true again this year. So we do have some natural savings that's happening in elementary already. There is potentially some more that we could get, and when I spoke with my principals, I told them I was reserving the right to come back to them if we need to squeeze some more. And then on the everything else, and I think it is safe to say that we are not intending to do any kind of reduction in force process. We think we have enough change and enough turnover to to absorb the 30 FTE that Jonathan's speaking of. We have spoken specifically with custodial staff, and it's interesting that that is said because of the COVID issues and things that are going on, and the additional amounts for sanitizing and cleaning and needing those people. And all of our jobs are important, so I'm not saying that, but that is not an area that we would intentionally cut, because there's a lot more work that we're requiring for the safety and protection of our students and our staff in this time.
I think, Mr. Chairman and Dave, I'm glad to hear that, but the communication I had with this friend, he's somebody I've known, well, gosh, going back years and years. It shows that rumors can get started, and I really want to make sure that we're on top of those rumors, so that when a rumor like this does get started, that the people involved get some kind of reassurance that that is not the case. Because the stress that goes through a building when you are looking at something as major as this, to where we've got to figure out a way to find all this money, the $14 million from the supplemental, and perhaps an equal amount from the state holdback. Next thing you know, we're looking at the better fraction of $30 million. And I realize going through these reductions that Jonathan has pointed out, there are any one of a half dozen ways that those don't come to fruition. And that fund balance that we spent, well, ever since I've been on the board, we have increased that fund balance because we have been able to manage our budget prudently. And I think this is something that really needs to be on the record, is how that prudent management of budgets, making sure that every dollar spent is justified and categorized and accounted for, has enabled us to build that fund balance very slowly over these last 4 or 5 years. That we are really looking at, that's the essence of what we're going to have to do. The lion's share of this cut is going to have to be from cutting that fund balance. And that, of course, is always frightful because it's short term. We can get through a single year, but it's obviously no way to make any long-term plans. Chairman Klopfenstein and I, for example, yesterday met with the mayor of Meridian, and what we have to do is, when we, if we decide that we as a board are going to present another levy, it's going to have to be all hands on deck. We are going to need the support of a lot of other community leaders, business leaders, corporate leaders. I mean, this is going to have to be a full-fledged campaign, and that's going to be pretty hard to put together, but it's what we look at, and these numbers being accurate, I think, are the great first step. I really appreciate that, Dave, but I want to make sure that I will be able to, as soon as we're done with this meeting, get a hold of my friend and say, those rumors you've heard, please tell them that that's not what's happening.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson, and I had a question for Mr. Gillen.
Yes, Trustee Johnson.
Jonathan, can you tell me the dollar amount, just like kind of general, how many millions did we get from the state last year, and what's the dollar amount total we're getting from the state this year with the 5% reduction?
So, Chairman and trustees, we received roughly, let me try to pull up something more specific, but around $220 million that we'll receive from them. And so what we're taking, the reduction, the 5% reduction was roughly right at, I want to say 12 or 13 million. And then with the supplemental levy, another 14 million. And so that's 27 million for next year. And then the reduction for this year, the 1% that we bore in 1920 was roughly 2.1 million.
Okay, so we got 220 million this year. What's the total dollar amount we got last year from the state?
Last year, you mean for, just because we're talking budget, sometimes it gets more confusing. Do you mean 18-19 or 19-20?
So let me rephrase it. what do we get for 1920 and what are we getting for 2021 net, all the holdbacks?
Yes, Chairman and trustees. Yeah, so the 220 million was the 1920. That was our current dollar amount. And then what we anticipate receiving will be a reduction of roughly that 13 million that we're going to see across the general fund. And that 220 million is not just general fund, that's general fund and the special revenue funds, the other state funding items.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get at, sorry, is that the 220 million, though, they originally set a budget that was not a flat budget. They had a growth in it. And then now they've taken some of the growth back. So what I'm trying to figure out is, are we getting a flat 220 because they took the 5% overall back, or are we getting less than 220 or anticipating less than 220? What's our just 220 to 221, 220 to 215? What's our anticipation total?
Perfect. Chairman and trustees, thank you. That does help with clarifying. Let me, I don't have that number sitting right in front of me. So let me go take a look at some of our budget documents. I'll try to pull that up. If there are other questions, then I can circle back with you, Trustee Johnson.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you.
This is Trustee Ozuna. What are we projecting for enrollment loss for this fall? Looking at that parent survey, I think that I saw 7% are not likely to attend this fall if there's community spread. So are we anticipating in the budget a reduction of students?
Chairman and trustees, thank you for the question. As of right now, we have the budget enrollment set at flat and ADA a slight reduction, a couple of support units. So we're not anticipating a reduction in enrollment. We are doing things, as you've heard from remote learning, to try to help mitigate some of that risk associated with if students don't return. We'll have other options available for them so that they'll be able to take coursework and stay within the district. But enrollment is budgeting as flat.
So then along with that, remote work or virtual school or whatever that might look like for the fall, what are the anticipated increased costs for those things? And then along those lines, what are the increased costs for, I don't know, if we have to add additional busing to maintain social distancing, or when we think about what fall looks like, what is that going to cost us extra than what it looked like for us this year?
Chairman and trustees, thank you for the question. So right now we're looking at, as we do remote learning, utilization of our current FTE. And so we'll be able to shift dollars and staffing around. The other things that you're seeing as us preparing for remote learning is the one-to-one initiative. We talked about that. That's going to be utilizing plant facility funds. So again, not a general fund impact, and then leasing the computers going forward. So with those, transportation, I think, is still a question that's outstanding, not just for us, but really across the state and across the nation, right? Is how do we handle what transportation looks like, especially since obviously there's an impact on just the number of drivers you can have and the number of buses. And so that one, I think, is one that we're still going to have to work through. The other costs, we feel like, based on what we're currently doing and the operations and the things we're going to be able to put together, that we're hopeful that the impact won't be an increase in costs, it'll be more of a reallocation of current expenditures.
Okay, I have a couple more questions if I can continue. That cut in the allocation for course fees, what does that really mean for our students in those classes? Chairman and trustees, thank you for the question. So right now, like I said, it starts off, we allocate $852,000. And then a lot of courses associated with that, our food science courses, other classes, some of our science coursework, they'll generate those course fees, or not generate the course fees, but they'll get an allotment from the course fee allocation we give out of the general fund to their individual teachers and classrooms. And so that will be a reduction. So as you can imagine, going from 852 to 175, I can tell you that we usually don't spend all 852. On average, we're spending around 425 to 440 of it. So we have some dollar amounts that are just part of the contribution to fund balance we have every year that now we won't have. And so that gap right off the bat, the first reduction associated with the 5%,
was really us removing the dollars we typically save every year. This second reduction is dollars we're currently spending. The schools do receive other allocations. They also receive a supply allocation. And so it'll be more of a budgetary management for the next year of how we utilize both the course fee allocation and the supply allocation as well, to ensure that we can meet the needs of students in the classroom.
You know, I'm just going to make a statement on that, but I think that this is one where the burden may end up falling on the teachers in purchasing those additional supplies to make that classwork happen for their students. And that is a concern to me. I mean, we're talking about science labs, art classes, cooking, sewing, I mean, those kinds of things, right? Where the supplies are a critical piece of the instruction in those classes.
Chairman,
I just want to
trustees,
make sure that I understand that.
thank you.
Does this also include music?
Could you repeat your question, Mrs. Zuna?
Does this include music as well?
Chairman and trustees, there are certain parts of the course fee allocation that do include music, yes. So part of the dollar amount they receive is associated with choir and marching band, and those allocations.
Okay. And then so that's more of just a comment then about my concerns around that. I also have concerns around the increase in the pay to participate fees. I think that people that can pay that will, and that's fine. But I think that we're going to increase the count of the families that cannot pay that. And I do have concerns about how that works and our ability to get these kids into those programs, because I think it's really important. Another question, do we have any idea how many new seats will be available at charter schools, and are we anticipating movement that direction? And do we know what that might look like in numbers?
Chairman and trustees, thank you. Yes, we do our best to try to track new seats associated with charters. So we do have Doral that is opening this year within our district. And so that one, I believe, is sitting at 199 seats. And that's at full capacity. So, which usually may or may not happen right year one. The impact of the charter schools is not felt so much in the 2021 budget year, but as we start rolling out to 21, 22, and 22, 23, as there's one particular charter school that'll be opening up 2 schools over that 2 years. And so that's part of that. If you saw during the fund balance discussion we had, that 1.7 million and the 735, as we tried to show the negative impact that is potentially to happen on fund balance, that's where those years start to become a little bit lower anticipated enrollments because of the impact and opening of those new schools.
Thanks. And one last question. Any additional costs for the opening of Pleasant View?
Chairman and trustees, yes. The discussion today was specifically on the supplemental levy impacts, but yes, the plan is next Tuesday. We'll give kind of a overall budget look of how everything is looking. And so yes, the Open Pleasant View is $1 million, 1.04.
Okay. I guess I'll take one more question if I can, and I'll steer it back to supplemental levy. Were there other things that we looked at when we were looking at, kind of where we're going to get this from? What other things were in the bucket that were considered that didn't make it to the list?
Chairman and trustees, thank you. There was some additional cuts as we looked at extended days. So that's not the entire allotment. So there was some dollars there. The other items that we looked at are either additional FTE or additional reduction in school days. A lot of the reductions that we made to some of those, I'll say soft cost areas, the non-personnel related ones, we did as part of the 5% reduction. If you remember, we went through and I said, we're talking about supplies, we're talking about equipment reductions, we're talking about contracted services reductions. So a lot of the supplemental levy reductions start to have to focus more on our staffing and associated personnel related costs.
Thanks. One other quick comment. I'm really thankful that this doesn't include a loss of instructional days for kids. I was very concerned about with our soft closures this year, and the fact that there might be an achievement gap for a lot of our students, I'm very thankful that we were able to keep those instructional days whole, or that you're looking at keeping those instructional days whole.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Newhoff.
Yeah, Trustee Newhoff, go ahead.
I'll just start out with a brief comment about this, the discussion we've had here. I'm a little concerned about whether we're going to get a supplemental levy passed anytime in the near future. And one of the philosophical underpinnings of the way this budget was looked at, I'm not criticizing necessarily for now what, for the next fiscal year, what we're doing, but this is not a long-term way to handle it if we actually lose that supplemental levy money. And I think we're going to have to look at other solutions potentially in the long run, because as Mr. Gillen pointed out, and I think it's probably gets a little bit worse than some of his projections at some point, is, we can't eat the fund balance forever. And so, I would hope that in future fiscal years, if something like what Mr. Gillen presented here is going to be the solution for 2021, that we might start to think about some other solutions. But I wanted to take this in a different direction, because one of the things Dr. Randalls wanted to talk about was whether we run the supplemental levy in August. And I have some questions about that. I mean, the first is what's our drop dead date with the county elections office and everything to make that decision?
Chairman and trustees, I can take that question. So we visited with the county, right? I contacted them Wednesday morning, and July 6th is the date. They would obviously love that if we were going to run something, that we got them something sooner than that, the ballot language that Holly Troxell prepares. And so we can start working on that immediately, as long as there's some comfort level with moving forward and bring it back to the board under the typical process that we did when we brought it the first time.
Okay, yeah, and so I mean that, and what's the election date again? It's in August, but
Chairman and trustees, I want to say it's August 25th. Let me pull it up. I have it.
So it's late August, though.
It is. It's late August, and I did speak with the county concerning whether we'd still have the kind of timing gap we have, where this one, the election was May 19th, but because of the absentee ballot calculations, it kind of rolled into June, and they weren't anticipating that as of right now. And so we would be able to have data. My concern was around, we have to do a certification associated with our tax certification as part of that process, and I wanted to ensure we're able to get data fast enough to get it in the tax certification, and we should be fine with that as well.
All right, and I have feelings both ways about doing this, but I think some things that we all ought to think about, at least have on the table. I mean, this is a scenario that was widely discussed in the legislature this last term, of turning right around after a failed election and running it on the next one repeatedly. So there's some political cost to doing that. I think we need to really take a hard look at whether, especially over the summer, our community is going to have the resources to rally behind it. I think that's going to be a difficult thing. I mean, obviously we need that money, and I don't know. I mean, my gut tells me that we're not going to fare much better in August, but who knows? Anyway, I just kind of wanted to drive the discussion at least around to that a little bit, because I know administration.
Chairman Klopfenstein, this is Mary Ann.
Dr. Reynolds.
I really appreciate Dr. Newhoff's comments, because one of and again, it really doesn't pertain to today, as we really just wanted to share information with the board and get a sense of your opinions on where we are and where we're headed. But I'm really anxious for the board to think with us about the future and the projections of growth and what facilities we will need to build. And my encouragement and the thought I have moving forward is, what would it take to get out of the supplemental levy cycle? So I know that would be a really hard thing to do, but maybe if we looked at it over time and we looked at perhaps a reduction over time in the levy to when we could get to the point where it's no longer it's no longer 5% of our budget. But I really appreciate those comments, Dr. Newhoff.
Yeah, this is Ed. I just wanted to note the time. I know that administration asked to close down around 8:30. Does any trustees have any just feelings about this? I mean, basically, we're looking at a mixed model. Does it work for everyone, or is it something that you feel comfortable with?
Mr. Chairman.
This is Trustee Johnson. Real quick, I'm with Dr. Newhoff. I think there's a longer term picture to solve, but short term is fine. The one concern I have is the dollar amount that we get out of the pay to play didn't seem significant enough for the pain it might cause. So that's my one feedback.
Thank you. Trustee Smiley.
Mr. Chairman, and reflecting on what Trustee Johnson said, we have choices. None of them are good. I think, though, and this is something, it's kind of reverse psychology, but when the people involved see, and the pay to play is a great example. When I was in school, if you wanted to go out for football, you went out for football. The school paid for everything. And now, unfortunately, the costs of athletics and other things like that have expanded greatly. I know when I was chairman of the band boosters, and since I had two daughters that were 4 years apart, I ended up raising money for the Centennial Band 8 solid years in a row, and I lost track of how many checks I wrote. But you know what? It was worth every penny of it. And the thing there is, we have bad choices. I think we need to communicate that none of these choices are good, and we need to ask for feedback. Which of these bad choices is the least bad, and which of them are intolerable? And that's a question we can't answer. We have to listen to our patrons, and we're going to have to get feedback. They said, no, we don't want the 14 million. So where do we cut the 14 million? That's a question we're going to have to listen to. And Trustee Johnson may be right.
Yeah. So Trustee Smiley and Chairman Klopfenstein, just to review the timeline facing us, on June 9th, next Tuesday, during the regular board meeting, Jonathan will present the amended budget for this current year, for the 1920, that he has gone through and reviewed that with us in past meetings. But on June 9th, we'll ask the board to approve the amended 1920 budget. So Jonathan, I'm saying these things, and if I say anything wrong, I know you'll correct me. On June 15th, with what we've discussed today, if we move forward, we can start putting details into place. And Jonathan will present the budget for 2021 for the review of that budget. And then on the morning of June 23rd, just before the board's advance, then we would ask the board to approve the budget for next year. So I just think it's good to keep that timeline in place, because the time sensitive nature for us is June 23rd is the last day that we can approve the budget for next year.
Chairman and trustees, and I'm gonna add one more thing to that schedule. Because we published with the expectation our budget hearing would be June 9th, we'll actually be getting a picture of not only the 1920 amended and looking to move forward with that, but we'll actually walk through what the 2021 budget is gonna look like with some of this information in it, which is why we wanted to gather some feedback today. Just because the June 9th is our actual budget hearing, and then we'll continue we have 14 days after that hearing occurs to evaluate budget changes and visit with you before the approval that happens on the 23rd, hopefully. So it'll be two budgets June 9th.
Well, I want to thank you, everyone, for your hard work. Appreciate this. I know we're closing in on your timeline to move on to your other meetings. And trustees, thank you very much for your time this morning. We definitely faced a long road, but at the same time, I appreciate the deep thoughts that administration is putting into this. Looks like we've got quite a bit more thinking to go, and definitely there's risk, but we shall be hopeful.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you very much. The first and second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Chairman is aye as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day.